Okay, uh, today we'll dive back into looking at some of our looking at reviewing a little bit from our diagramming stuff, and then we'll review assignment 3, the scene analysis. Just go through the format of that assignment for you in preparation for your John passage. Okay, and let's see. I think, and then if you have any specific questions about your John passage, um, whether it's the character setting analysis or the scene analysis or anything like that, I'll give some time to be able to answer that. Okay. So, are there any questions or before we get started? Just in general, anything, questions you guys have on
So,
anything?
Pastor Tim, so
Yeah.
after the background, no, literally context assignment, when I get into the character analysis, I will just be focusing on my passage.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
The character
Got
and
it.
setting analysis is, yeah, that's when you move
Just
into your specific passage. So, yeah, after the background context and the literary context, that's book level, and everything else after that is your passage.
okay. All right. Got it.
And
Thank
actually,
you.
what's interesting is, yeah, at our church, the pastor's going through we just started the Gospel of John this year. So, um, I guess this year the theme is John, the Gospel of John. So, um, any other questions before we get started? All right, let's dive in. Uh, Grab our notes. Here we are. And last week, what I thought I would do is sort of go back to just some more of the basic principles, kind of the basic building blocks, sort of as a way to review a little bit of what we covered, but also too to take a little bit different approach. Um, Maybe that would be helpful to some of you. And so for diagramming, remember that the key part of that is, I connecting these phrases and clauses together. And so I broke it down for you last week, and I wanted to try to get you to think of it big picture as you've got an epistle, say, or again, this could qualify for a poem as well. You have an epistle that's essentially been written with a specific purpose in mind, right? There, a certain circumstance took place that prompted the author to write. That's called the occasion of the epistle. And then the author has a specific purpose that or message he wants to communicate to the recipients. Okay? And he does that by putting together units of thought that are in the form of paragraphs. Okay, and again, in epistles, it's instructional, it's didactic, and so each paragraph connects together, each unit of thought connects together to form the author's flow of thought. And when you're all done reading through the letter, you should be able to arrive at what was his main point and how did he arrive at that point. Okay, now each paragraph or unit of thought is broken down into sentences, one or more sentences. Put together, they formulate that particular unit of thought or idea from that paragraph. And then we can take even each sentence and break it down into its pieces, which we've called phrases and clauses. And we can go one more step, even more basic and fundamental, by looking at each phrase or clause. Those can be broken down into essentially 4 types of words: nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. And so last week we spent some time reviewing that, and Sid was very happy, a big smile on his face, and I think his whole week he was just full of great joy from doing that exercise. But this week, so that's what we covered last time together. It was, and then we just defined, or I reviewed with you guys that the noun, verb, adjective, adverb, what those are. And again, remember noun, person, place, or thing. Then there's some examples. A verb, and again, two kinds of verbs, right? There's the verb of action and the verb of being. Now, technically, in English grammar, these have more technical terms, but I'm trying to keep things simple and straightforward. There's transitive verbs, intransitive verbs, helping verb, there's all this stuff. But bottom line is we've got two kinds of verbs: verbs that describe an action taking place, or verbs that are describing a condition or the state of the subject. All right. So those are the two basic kinds that I want us to be concerned about or considering. Now, the adjective and adverb are those words that adjectives, right, modify or describe a noun. So they're connected to a noun. And an adverb's connected to usually a verb, sometimes another adjective or adverb. And those are going to be real important to keep in our minds as we move forward when we go to diagramming, because we're going to be asking, how does this phrase or clause modify the word it's connected to? And it's going to modify it like an adjective or an adverb. Now, in that case, it'll be a whole phrase or clause. So it'll be a group of words, not just one word, but it'll function the same. In the example here, notice for adjectives, I've italicized the adjective in each example. And in this case, it's just one word adjectives. And the same with the adverbs. All right, they're just one word adverbs. But when we look at diagramming, we'll have a whole phrase or a whole clause that will act like an adverb, or it will act like an adjective. And so if you can embed these concepts in your mind of the noun is person, place, or thing. The verb is either an action or a mode of being, expresses an action or mode of being. The adjective modifies the noun. The adverb modifies the verb, primarily. If you can have those really embedded in your mind, that's going to really help when we get to diagramming, because we're going to be asking questions like, okay, here I have a phrase. What word does it modify? It seems to modify this word. How does it modify this word? And that's when you're going to be saying, okay, is this phrase acting like an adjective? That is it modifying a noun? Or is this phrase acting like an adverb? That is modifying a verb. Again, sometimes another adjective or adverb. That's going to be the process over and over and over again in our diagramming. Okay? That's why I'm coming back to these fundamentals, because if you can grasp these four parts of speech and how they work and what to look for, that's really going to help you when we're diagramming. And then again, the diagram's really going to help you when you're breaking down a passage and trying to see its structure, so that you will focus on what the author's focusing on as the major points, instead of, sometimes our tendency can be to grab a minor point and make that the major point when the author isn't doing that. Okay, so we want to be able to see what is the major point the author is making in the paragraph, and then how do the other phrases and clauses support that point. Okay, so that's the big picture here, and the big picture has to start with our understanding of the small picture, which is these the nuts and bolts. Again, we're back to this. If we can understand how nouns and verbs, adjectives, adverbs work, then we can understand phrases and clauses. If we can understand phrases and clauses, then we understand the sentence. If we understand sentences, that'll take us to the paragraph. All right, so it goes both directions. We need to see from the top down and from the bottom up. All right, so before I was showing you from the top down. Today and last week, I want to show you from the bottom up. Okay, that's why we focused our attention last week together on these building blocks of the clause or the phrase. Okay, are there any questions on this this review? Anybody have any questions at all? You can go back last week on the notes or the video if you want to look at some examples. We looked at a few basic examples, and then we looked at a passage together, identifying the nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Okay, now what I want to do is sort of go back up from the bottom, go back up our diagram here, our figure. We've looked at the clause again, or the phrase, which is made up of these four basic components. Now I want us to look at clauses and phrases in terms of how they build a sentence. All right. And this will be something we covered quite a while back, but I wanted to review it here and look at it now going from the bottom up. Okay. So again, while a clause is made up of these four, or can be made up of these four types of words, as well as, and maybe I can put this here. This is probably would be helpful. Yeah, or a phrase. I'll talk about the distinction of that in a minute. They don't have to be made up of all these building blocks, but at least some of them, some of the four. Now, a sentence is made up of these clauses and phrases. And again, remember, each sentence contains at least one clause. Okay, if you do not have a clause, you do not have a sentence. Well, what is a clause? A clause is made up of a subject and verb. Okay, so a sentence contains clauses and phrases, but it doesn't have to contain phrases. It must have at least one clause to be a sentence. In other words, you do not have a sentence if you don't have a noun, or a subject and a verb, or basically a noun and a verb. Okay, so that's the basic definition of a sentence. A sentence is describing something about a subject doing something, or a subject being something. Okay, and now let's just review a little bit of these terms now. The subject of a sentence. All right, and again, I know for some of you this will be you already understand this clearly, but I just want to, for the benefit of all of us, kind of make sure we're clear on these very important terms.
Yeah. Mr. Stam?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I would just like to clarify. So you said that a sentence is a subject and a verb, even if it doesn't have a direct object.
Correct.
Okay.
It must at least have that. Usually, and notice I say it here, usually it does have an object.
Okay.
But it doesn't have to be a sentence. A sentence essentially expresses a complete thought about a subject.
Okay.
Okay.
So a subject and a verb can constitute a sentence already, a clause. It could be called a clause already.
Yeah, you could say, Bobby spoke. That can be a complete thought, right? You have a subject, Bobby, and you have the verb.
All right. Okay. Got it.
So now you could say Bobby spoke 10 words. Now I have an object, the words. Okay, but I can express a complete thought with just a noun and a verb at times. But usually you'll find an object, but not always, or a predicate, adjective, or noun. So a sentence expresses a complete thought about a subject and must contain at least one clause. And again, a clause is a noun plus a verb. Or a subject, sorry, which is a noun plus a verb. Okay? To have a sentence, you must have at least that. Another example, right, from Scripture. 2-word sentence. Jesus wept. That's a complete sentence because it contains a noun and a verb, and it does express a complete thought. Now, I could have said Jesus wept many tears, so I just added a direct object. Now, the passage doesn't say that. It just says Jesus wept. Could have said Jesus wept a long time. Okay, this would have been an adverb expressing how when Jesus wept. Of course, again, it doesn't say that in the actual text, but there's an example of a complete sentence that's just two words. All right, so again, the subject of a sentence, simply think of it as a noun which carries out an action or about which a statement is made. Okay? And here, Anselmo hit the ball. Anselmo is, sorry, brother, spelled your name. Anselmo is he's doing the action. So he's the subject. He's the subject of the sentence. He's the focus. It's a noun which carries out an action. Or, again, remember, we can also have, it can be described. So, for example, it could be, Anselmo is hungry. Okay, he's not doing an action there, but it's describing the subject. A statement's being made about the subject. Okay? And then coincident with that, again, to have a sentence, you must have a subject and a verb. Now, the verb is, as we talked about already, the verb is either an action being done by the subject or the state of being of the subject. Okay? So again, Anselmo hit the ball. That's a verb of action. I am tired. That's a verb of being. All right? We discussed that last week. So just reiterating that. Now that we're talking about a sentence, we're using terminology, subject and verb. Okay, a subject is a noun. Noun is the more general category. Nouns are not always subjects, right? They can be objects as well. But the subject is always a noun, okay? And then the verb is the action which the subject does or the state of being of the subject. Okay? How are we doing so far? Hopefully this is just review. We're good? Okay. Now, let's keep building on this. We have the subject, we have the verb. Now here, as Pastor Bobby mentioned, often we can have an object in a sentence. So think of the subject as the actor. The subject is the actor. Subject. The verb is the action. And the object is what is acted upon or what participates in the action. Okay? So Arn hit the ball. Now, in this case, ball is the object. It's receiving the action. Okay? Now, as I showed you earlier, a sentence does not have to have an object, but it often does. Okay? Because if we just said Arn hit, we're sort of left with that's not complete. What did he hit? Okay, he hit the ball. All right? So subject, verb, object. Subject, verb,
Pastor,
object.
Pastor Tim,
Yes, sir.
how about uh, Arn made a hit?
Okay. Arn made a hit. Was he singing or playing baseball?
No, but no specific thing, but
Yeah.
uh, is that a complete statement?
Yeah. this case, your
Yeah.
verb is made.
Made is a verb.
Okay, so I'll
Made
underline
is
that. So the subject is Arn. Made is a verb. It's an action. We could say Arn made a speech, or Arn made dinner, right? Those are different uses of that verb made. If he made a hit, then the hit is, in this case, hit is being used as a noun, okay, and it would be the object. Remember in English, I don't know how it is in Visayan, but in English, you'll have several words that can function like a verb or a noun depending on the context. I think we talked about that a little last week. So, right, you can have love, words which can be a verb or a noun. Okay, love, right? I love books, or let's talk about love. Okay, those are, we talked about book. Book's another one. Remember, book a flight? That's a verb, but I like to read books. That's a noun. What's the one we just, hit. Arn hit the ball, verb. Arn made a hit, noun. Let's see. Reason.
Gulo.
He reasoned out the problem, verb. What is your reason for going? Noun. All right, there's a lot of English words like that. Is that the case in Cebuano? Where you have the same word that could be acting like an action or a verb or a noun? Does that happen in Cebuano?
We have Pastor Tim. We have that but it depends on the stress and where you put the emphasis. That will change the meaning in the Cebuano.
Oh, as you pronounce it, the tone you use?
As you pronounce the stress, that will change the meaning.
Okay. So it's the same word, but you would, if it's acting like a verb, you would say it differently. Then
You will say it differently.
okay. Yeah, and in English you don't have that change in intonation, right? You, like I said, you could say I love books, or let's talk about love. There's no change in the way I say the word love. It all
Pastor
depends
Tim,
on the words around it. What's that?
like in our Filipino language, when you say bukas, that's tomorrow. When you say bukas, that's open.
Open.
Or like, actually I know one. Hapon and apon, right?
Hapon is the afternoon. Hapon is the Japanese.
Japanese, yeah. I know I got in trouble a few times when I mispronounced.
no, but our point here, Pastor Tim, is the same word without the change in meaning. Same word can function as noun, either noun or sometimes a verb, right?
Yeah.
That's our point, right? Same word without change in meaning can function as a noun or a verb.
Yeah, and I think that's true for many languages. Now, in Hebrew, usually in Hebrew, you'll have a root word that can be made into a verb or a noun, but there'll be other letters that indicate which it is. So you'll see the same, Hebrew is basically made up of 3-letter root words. So every word almost is, every word starts with, there's 3 letters that form the root of the word. And then depending on other letters that are added to it, you can tell if it's a verb or a noun. Greek, trying to think if there's words that look exactly the same, whether they're a noun or a verb. I'd have to think about that, because verbs usually have different endings and forms to tell us it's a verb. But in English, there's a number of words that can act like a noun or a verb and be spelled and sound exactly the same. The only way to tell which it is by the context, the words around it. So for example, if I said, I love books, right? Here we see that it's got to be functioning as a verb, because if it were three nouns, there's no action here. Unless, you know, it was a sentence that had I, comma, love, comma, books, that was part of a list of something. But if you just had these three words, you have to say love here is acting like a verb. But if you said this book is about love, now love is a noun. Okay.
For example, Pastor Tim, can I cite a verse as an example?
Yeah, that'd be
John
great.
1:12. So it starts with a conjunction. But as many as receive him. But as many as receive him. Okay. Let's take that as an example, Pastor Tim.
Okay. So, but as many as received him.
Okay. The sentence completes. He gave them the right to become children of God. Okay. So if we just take the but as many as receive him, so that's just a phrase.
Well, here
That's not a complete. Is that a complete sentence or no?
It's not a complete sentence, but it is a clause because it does have a verb and a subject. Subject.
Okay, it has a verb. Yeah, many and receive, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it is a clause, and we're going to look at these in a minute. Let me do this. Clause, but not a complete thought. And we know that because of this as, but as, many as.
Mm-hmm.
That leaves it hanging. It's dependent on something else.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I think, yeah, the sentence completes to them.
He gave them the right to become children of God.
Yeah, to become children of God. So he, oops, sorry. He is the subject, gave the right. That's your, right there is your main sentence, your main clause, your subject and verb and object in this case, right?
Uh-huh.
Which right? To become, so that would be your, but he gave the right. That is the main sentence here. All right. So, but I just wanted to point out that you really got to, if you see a word, don't, you know, it could be a verb or a noun in some cases, and you can only tell by what the words are around it sometimes.
So, follow-up question, Pastor Tim.
Yeah.
So, in looking at a phrase or a clause, in looking at a sentence, once we divide it, okay, can we say that one of the prominent markers we can use to identify a clause is the verb? If it contains a verb, it could likely be categorized as a clause. Can we say that, Pastor Tim?
Yeah.
If it has a verb.
We're going to get to that in a minute. All right. So
Okay.
just hang on.
Third. Yeah.
I'll answer that. Okay. So, so here, subject, verb, object are the key components of a sentence. Now, we have to remember something though. When we talk about objects occur only with certain kinds of verbs, only with the verb of action, right? Because again, the definition of an object is a noun which receives an action. So if you don't have a verb of action, there's no object because there's nothing receiving an action. All right. For example, And this is where we have those two other, more technical sounding words, the predicate adjective or predicate noun. All right. Now, so if you have a verb of action, then you can have an object, right? Because again, object receives the action. But if you have a verb of being, all right, there is no object. Why? Because there's no action. But what you do have is these two possibilities, what's called a predicate adjective or predicate noun. I won't explain why that word predicate's there. It would be a long discussion. For those of you that care, I mean, basically a sentence is this: equals a subject and a predicate. All right? But I don't want to get into all that, except just to say this. The object happens is what is receiving the action. But if there's no action, if your sentence is uses a verb of being, then what you have is you don't have an object, but what you have are these, what they're called a predicate adjective or predicate noun. And these simply means this: they're describing or telling the state of the subject. Okay, so predicate adjective is just an adjective that describes the state of the subject. So Michael is tired, and he must be, because he turned off his video, so he's probably taking a nap there. Michael is tired. And so this is, I knew you'd turn on the video. Now in this case, tired is just, it's an adjective. It's describing Michael. Okay, it's not an object because it's not receiving some action. But it's still part of the sentence, because if we just say Michael is, that's not a complete thought. In fact, only one person can say that, right? For whom would this be a complete sentence? Only one person in the universe, right?
God.
God is, period. All right? The eternally existent, self-existent one. None of us are that. So whenever you have a human and the word is, there must be something to complete it. Okay? Michael is tired. Michael is handsome. Michael is tall. Michael is, we can fill in the different, those are all adjectives because they're all describing a noun. They're telling us something about a noun. Okay, that's called a predicate adjective. Now, sometimes when we have a verb of being, we're not describing the person as far as their state, but we are describing something about them. For example, Bobby is a preacher. Now, in this case, preacher is not an adjective. It is a noun. Okay, that completes the thought. So in this case, I'm not giving an attribute of Bobby as far as an adjective. In this case, I'm giving another noun to describe Pastor Bobby. Okay, or I could say Bobby is a man. Bobby is a father. Bobby is a husband. Those are all nouns. Okay? So all that means is this. You'll have two kinds of these clauses: subject plus a verb plus an object, and that's when there's a verb of action. Okay? And then the subject plus, you could have a subject plus a verb, and when it's a verb of being, you don't have an object. Again, there's no action taking place, but you could have this predicate adjective, or you will have a predicate adjective or predicate noun. Okay?
So, Pastor Tim, that's a formula already.
Yeah, so these are two types of sentences, or really technically clauses. And I'll get into that in a minute. And again,
Sentence pattern.
Sentence pattern. Yeah, okay. That's a good descriptor. I'll say clause pattern. And again, remember, a sentence contains at least one clause. And it could be a subject, verb, object, or a subject, verb. I guess there are three, subject and a verb.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Subject, verb, object, subject, verb, predicate, adjective.
and predicate noun.
Okay, so these are very important points. In fact, let's just go through a couple examples, and I'll have you guys help out here. Just identify simply the subject, verb, and the object, all right? So we'll start with you, Arn. We'll give you a couple of these. Just identify, and these are examples of the first kind of clause pattern or sentence, the subject, and then a verb of action, and then the object. Okay, so Arn, just help us out here. Subject, verb, and object.
I read the book. I is the subject and the object, of course, the book. Am I right?
Yep, and what's the verb?
Read.
Okay, there you go. All right, go ahead and do the next one here.
Okay. He preached two sermons. He is the subject, and then the object is sermon.
Yep. And
Sermons.
what's the verb?
Preach.
Now, what is this number 2 here? How would you describe that?
Adjective describes how many sermons.
Excellent. All right. It's an adjective. Now, let me do it this way. This might be a little easier. So if we go down here, the bottom, he is the noun, right? Preached is the verb.
Yeah.
2 is adjective. What is sermons? Is that a noun? What kind of part of speech is that?
Sermons is a noun, plural.
Yes, good. Okay. So here, subject and objects are always nouns, by the way. And then, of course, the verb is a verb. And then 2, in this case, and Arn was exactly correct, 2 is telling us something about the sermons. In this case, how many? So it's modifying sermons. Okay. All right, good. Let's give you one more, Arn. You're doing great.
Okay. We ran a kilometer. D is the subject, and run is the verb. Predicate nominative.
Okay. This is a noun. Kilometer is a noun, but again, notice what kind of verb do we have? Verb of action?
Action.
So-
Action verb.
So we're going to have an object, right?
Yeah.
And the object is what? It's kilometer.
Kilometer.
Yeah.
Kilometer.
Now,
Yes.
it doesn't sound like it's receiving the action, but in a sense it is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I know it's describing how far he went, but a kilometer here is a noun that is, in a sense, participating in the action. Okay, it's a thing.
A unit of measure.
Yeah, it's a
A
unit,
unit of measure. It's a noun.
Yeah, it's a noun, and we can think of it in this sentence as an object. Okay. Even though
Okay.
it's kind of a unique sort of object. Now, what is this letter A, Arn? A kilometer.
Article. An article, Pastor.
Yeah, it's called an article. We haven't talked much about articles. Articles always they define or describe a noun. Articles are a and the, all right?
Okay.
So they
Yes, Pastor.
they modify a noun. Now, if we were talking about Greek, we'd really get into this, an arthrus. Wait, an arthrus. That's an indefinite. article. Okay.
Okay.
And there's a whole discussion about anarthrous nouns in Greek, which I'm not going to get into. But I know sometimes you just want to hear some fancy words. So there's a fancy word for you. But we're going to ignore it. Who cares? All right.
Anarthrous.
Anarthrous.
We will
Okay.
use that on, we will use that on Sunday. Anarthrous.
Yeah, go for it.
The only noun I know is MacArthur.
Okay. Pastor Noor, let me give you a couple of these. All right. Just do the same thing Brother Arn was doing. Subject, verb, object of this sentence. You're still muted there.
Unmute, Pastor Nor, unmute.
Uh-oh, did we lose him?
Yeah,
He's having trouble with the
lagging.
internet.
So that is go on and off.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, Katsut is there already. Mm.
We lost him again. Pastor Noor, is your Wi-Fi okay, or you're still muted?
Pastor Tim,
Yeah,
his wife is okay.
his wife is okay.
Not the Wi-Fi.
I get.
Ah, the Wi-Fi. I'm sorry.
Oh, there's always a comedian in the crowd.
No.
Pastor Noor, are you okay?
No.
No?
Oh.
Okay.
Hopefully.
I'll have
all night.
Okay, I'll
What
have someone
happened, Pastor
else
Nor?
do this one then. It sounds like, yeah, your microphone is having trouble.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
so
All right, Kazot, can you do this one then? We'll let
Okay,
Pastor.
Pastor. The dog barked all night. The dog is the subject. Bark the verb. Night's the object. All is an adjective.
Good. So the dog barked all night. Now, what is the here?
Definite article, the
Yeah, it's an article.
article.
Definite, yeah, because it's specifically referencing the dog. It's a specific dog. Dog is a noun. Barked is the verb. And then you said all is what now?
Adjective.
Adjective, good. And then night is a noun. All right. All right, let's give you one more.
Sid taught the class yesterday. Sid is the subject. Taught is the verb. Class is the object. Yesterday is an adjective.
Okay. So let's do, we got subject, verb, object. Now let's go on the lower side and we'll talk. Sit is a noun. Taught is a verb. The is what again?
Article.
Article. And then class is a noun. Now yesterday you say is an adjective. Now what yesterday normally is describing what?
Noun.
When we think of yesterday or tomorrow or now, we're speaking about what? A reference to time, right?
Time.
So if it's talking
Still a
about
noun.
time,
Still noun.
it's, if we're talking about time, we're saying when Sid taught the class, right?
Modifying the verb. So it's
Yeah,
an adverb.
yesterday
Ah.
is when
Modifying
Sid taught. And remember, this is why I talked about the adverbs Okay,
Yes.
because it said it's an adverb modifies to describe a verb telling when, where, why, or how the verb happens.
So it's an adverb.
So it's yesterday is an adverb because it's telling us when Sid taught.
Class. When
Okay, that key thing is when. All right. Now you would think, and I can understand why you would say adjective, because it's located next to the word class.
yes, yes, Pastor.
So yeah, it would seem to make sense. It's going to modify the word that it's next to. But this is where you have to think, okay, how is this word working in this sentence? It's not telling me about the class because it's answering the question when. It's talking about a time. All
Okay.
right. So, so I think it makes sense. It would make sense if it modified class because it's next to it, but that's not how it's functioning. It's answering the question when. And so when it's going to modify a verb, in this case, taught. Sid taught. Now we could have said, but normally in English, you wouldn't say it this way. You wouldn't say in English, whoops. You wouldn't say Sid taught yesterday the class, right? That's not, in English, that's not a, the way we normally say that. If it was just Sid taught yesterday, then we'd leave it like that. Then you could tell, oh, it modifies taught. But if we're talking about the class, which is the object, you wouldn't see it written this way. You would not see Sid taught yesterday the class. You would see Sid taught the class, subject, verb, object, and then the adverb yesterday. Okay, it's just the way English sort of works as far as what
Okay.
sounds right and what doesn't sound right.
Pastor Tim, I have a question.
Yeah, Michael.
Okay. Does it make sense? Yesterday, the sentence is using adverb because of the verb that is being used. There is using a verb, kind of a verb tense, something.
Yeah,
Verb tense.
yeah.
It's indicating when or something like that, because the clue is the verb tense that is being used.
Yeah, in this case, what is the tense?
Um, Past tense, something.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because
that's
if
a
you're
good
going
thing.
to use that in future tense, the adverb is will be changed something.
Yeah, because you wouldn't say, so you wouldn't say Sid teaches the class yesterday, because teaches is present tense, right? Or Sid will teach the class yesterday. That doesn't make sense either, right?
Yeah.
But you would say Sid will teach.
Contrary to the rules of grammar.
Yes. You could say Sid will teach the class tomorrow. All right. So yeah, these are some examples of
The agreement, Pastor Tim. The
yes,
agreement of the words in the sentence.
Something
the
verb
agreement
agreement.
of the adverb and the verb. Okay. So yeah, it has to match an idea. So in English, yeah, you'll have the verb tense will give can give a clue when you're talking about time related adverbs. The thing I wanted you guys to notice is this adverb here, or this word here is an adverb, even though it's located on the other side of the object. Okay. And how you figure this out is just ask yourself, how is each word functioning in this sentence? Sid taught the class. Okay, that makes sense. I've got my subject, Sid, he's doing the action. Taught is the verb, that is the action. And class is the object, that's receiving the action. Now, what is yesterday doing here? Well, yesterday, that's talking about a time. Time, okay. When something happens, that means it's going to modify a verb. Now, if we had said, now sometimes you might see it worded this way. Yesterday, Sid taught the class. Okay. English, sometimes they'll have that. Now, what if we had Sid taught the large class yesterday? What's this word large? How is that functioning in this sentence? What is it describing or modifying?
Adjective.
Adjective.
The class,
Adjective.
right?
Yeah.
It's telling us it's something about the class. What kind of class? A large class. Okay.
Large class.
Adjective.
Now, you
Large.
could have this. Sid taught the class which was large. Now notice, I now have more than one word here. But this clause, actually, you have a subject and a verb, which was large, is modifying class. So this clause, which was large, is now functioning as an adjective. All three words together. You see that? So even though if we were to describe each part, we would say Sid's a noun, taught's the verb, the is the article, class is a noun, which is a noun, right? It's a pronoun. Was is a verb, large is a predicate adjective. So, but when we're going to look at phrases and clauses later, this whole clause is functioning like an adjective, modifying class. So it's taken as a collection of words together in this case. All right? That makes sense, you guys? You see that?
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
is where we're
makes
headed
sense.
as far as the diagram is we're going to see that word, not just one word can function like an adjective or an adverb, but actually a group of words can function that way. And this is where the diagram comes in, because then if I take this sentence, all right, and I want to diagram it, what I would do is put which under class, because it's an adjective modifying class. Now, if I had Sid taught the large class, this is how that would diagram. Okay. That's the one word. Both cases, large is modifying class. And which was large, modifying class. It's telling us something about the class. But if I have Sid taught the class yesterday, yesterday is modifying taught. So I'd put that under the verb because it's telling us when he taught. Okay. Now, what if I had said Sid taught the class when it was dark? Now, again, I've got a clause. It's a dependent clause. It can't stand by itself. And it, as a whole, is functioning as an adverb.
Adverb.
Because it's telling us when he taught. So I'd put it under taught. But notice, this time, it's not just one word. It's actually a group of words. A group of words which forms a clause. And as a clause, it answers the question when he taught. So it's functioning, the clause is functioning as an adverb. Okay, so you can have an adverb, which is just one word, yesterday, or you can have an adverbial clause, which is a group of words that function or act like an adverb, which means they are together modifying a particular word. In this case, taught. Okay, so it's the same concept as far as grammatical function. Adverbs modify verbs. Now, an adverb can be a single word or it can be a group of words. And if it's a group of words, you call it an adverbial phrase or clause, but it's still acting like an adverb. All right. Or, like I said in this example, Sid taught the class which was large. This would be called technically an adjectival clause because it's a clause that's acting like an adjective. This would be an adverbial clause. It's a clause acting like an adverb. Yesterday would just be called an adverb. Or large would just be called an adjective because it's when it's a single word, you just call it the adjective or adverb. But if it's a word, a phrase or a clause, you would call it adjectival phrase or adjectival clause. And all that means is the clause or the phrase is acting like an adjective, modifying a noun. You guys with me?
Yes, Pastor Tim.
Nose.
Pastor Tim,
Getting the headache or it's okay?
Pastor Tim, I have a
Yeah,
question.
Michael.
What if I just wonder if what's the positioning of if you're going to diagram if you're going to add a prepositional phrase there after class. Let's say, for example, Sid taught the class in the library when it was dark. So how are you going to?
Okay, good question. Sid taught the class. Well, let's do it this way first. Sid taught the class in the evening. Okay. So as you said, Michael, we have a preposition here, in. So this is a prepositional phrase. All right.
Yes.
Now we ask ourselves, okay, this prepositional phrase, is it acting like an adverb or an adjective? We know it modifies something because it can't stand by itself. In the morning, or in the evening, sorry, in the evening doesn't stand on its own. It doesn't tell us anything by itself. It needs to go somewhere. It needs to connect to something. So in this sentence, it's connecting to one of the other words in the sentence, right?
Yeah.
So we ask ourselves, okay, in the evening, is this acting like an adjective or an adverb? That's the question you want to ask.
Adverb.
Yeah, adverb, because it's describing what? What question is it answering?
Thought.
When?
Yeah, when
When,
something
when.
happens,
When.
right?
Question of when.
It's so in the evening, in this case, it's answering or it's telling us when something happened. All right, and in this case, the when is taught. Sid taught the class in the evening. That's when he taught the class. So we would put it in the evening, we would put underneath taught. Because it modifies the verb, because it's an adverb. Or technically, it's an adverbial phrase telling us when Sid taught.
Yeah.
Okay?
So, Pastor Tim,
Yes.
another example would be if we want to modify class, we can use a prepositional phrase beginning with of. Of evening students. Something like that.
Yeah, let me come back to that in a minute. That's a good.
Of evening attenders.
Yeah, I'll come right back to that in a minute. Let me finish Michael's question, and then that's another good one, Pastor Bobby, because Michael asked, "What about having Sid taught the class in the evening?" And then he said, because we had when it was dark before.
Mhm.
So let's say now we have this whole longer sentence. In the evening is a phrase, and then when it was dark, that's another, in this case, a clause. So what do I do with that one? Well, it's still answering the question when. Okay, so in this case, both of these, in the evening and when it was dark, are going to modify taught, because they're both describing when the action took place. Okay, this would be an adverbial phrase because it's a phrase. This is an adverbial clause.
Okay.
All right, but both of them are telling us something about when. Now, if you had said Sid taught the class in the
Library.
okay, library when it was dark. All right, now what have we done? Well, let me just take out when it was dark, because we've already, in the library is a prepositional phrase. And what is it describing? What question is it answering?
Where?
It's a location. Exactly. Where? And as I told you before, adverbs, let's go back to our chart. This is something you're going to want to have with you. Adverbs modify or describe a verb telling when, where, why, or how. So because it's describing where, then that phrase is modifying the verb because it's telling us where the action happened. Telling us where the action happened. Now, let's take the example Pastor Bobby mentioned. Sid taught the class of eager students. Something like that, right? Bobby, was that sort of?
Yeah, something like that, Pastor.
So now in this case, we have a prepositional phrase because of is a preposition there. What do we do with this? Is this phrase, so we ask the question, is of eager students acting like an adjective or an adverb? That's the question we ask ourselves. Is it describing, telling us something about the action, something about Sid, or something about the class?
Something about the class.
It's telling us what kind of class.
It's modifying the class.
So it's adjectival, telling us what kind of class or which class, the class of eager students. And again, this is a phrase, and technically eager is an adjective modifying students, but we take it as a phrase of eager students. And as a phrase together, it's acting like an adjective because it's modifying class. It's describing the class. What kind of class? Class of eager students. Okay? So, any questions on any of these examples so far? The better you can understand what's going on here, then that's what we do when we diagram passages. We're asking this question every time. The first key in diagramming is, first I need to find what's my main sentence, my main subject and verb. And then after that, it's to find all the phrases and clauses in the paragraph. Remember, we did that a couple months ago. Then, once you find all the phrases and clauses, and we do that by identifying those connector words, you know, prepositions or conjunctions, relative pronouns, participles. Then once we have the phrases and clauses identified, the next step is asking ourselves, okay, what's this phrase or clause doing? Is it acting like an adjective or is it acting like an adverb? And that directs us then to what word it modifies. If it's acting like an adjective, it's modifying a noun. If it's acting like an adverb, it's modifying a verb. Okay? This is the thought process. Main clause. Identify phrases and clauses. Indicate or answer how does each phrase or clause function. And then we place it under that word which it's modifying.
Pastor Tim,
Yes.
is it possible if you have uh, the two, the adverbial and adjectival phrases or clauses in one sentence, and how can you, I mean, how can you diagram that or something? It's a kind odd kind of, you know, having, yeah, when it was dark
Yeah.
or in the evening, something.
We can do this one. Okay. So we have of eager students. That's one phrase we identify. In the evening, that's another phrase. So now we ask a question. We still have the main sentence here. Sid taught the class. That's still, nothing has changed as far as my subject, verb, and object. We already determined of eager students modifies class because it's telling us what kind of class. Now in the evening, we have to ask, is in the evening, does that describe students? Does it describe class or taught? And again, a way to figure that out is just, well, what kind of question does it answer? Well, in the evening is a time. So that's telling us when something happened. It must modify a verb because it's answering the question when. Remember, adverbs basically answer how, when, where, or why. Adjectives answer what kind, how many, who, which one. Okay? They describe a noun. Adverbs tell us, they describe a verb. They tell us something about a verb. So in this case, nothing's changed. Of eager students, modifying class, because it's describing, okay, adjectival, telling us what kind of class. And then in the evening, modifying, oh, sorry. Why won't it let me? There. In the evenings, modifying taught because it's adverbial because it's telling us when Sid taught. Okay?
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Does that make sense?
Yes, Pastor Tim, because I think I asked that question because I haven't experienced doing a diagram, having a some kind like that formation of diagramming something, because we've experienced just a ladder type kind of something. So I'm asking that because is it possible to in the passage to have a like that kind of situation?
Oh yeah, all the time. It's very common. Let's see. Let's see, John.
Sir Tim, Michael experienced a line diagramming.
Yeah, line diagramming is quite different because line diagramming, you're identifying parts of speech. So you're really only looking at one word at a time. Block diagramming or structural diagramming, you're looking at a phrase or a clause at a time. Okay, so for example, if we had, and I don't have the, I can't, if we had Sid, let's see. A line diagram would look something like this, right? oh, come on. Okay. And it always takes a long time here. Okay, you'd have this, then you'd have, right, the line between the subject and verb, right?
Yes, Pastor Tim.
Okay. Sorry, I don't like line diagrams. I think they're really helpful if you're identifying parts of speech, but okay, so here. So Sid taught, and then depending on if it's a direct object, I think it's like this, right? It's a diagonal. I haven't done line diagrams in so long. Something like this.
It's a vertical, Pastor Tim, if it is a noun.
Oh, it goes like this, right? Goes down here, right? And then if it's a direct object, is it like this?
Pastor Tim, it's a vertical direct object.
Yeah.
One more line, Pastor Tim. One more line. Of one
Like
more
this,
vertical
right?
line. One more vertical line, Pastor Tim.
Well, it doesn't go all the way through though, right? It
Yeah.
stops at here. It stops at the horizontal line, correct? Something like that. I thought the direct object did this. I thought it was like this. No?
No.
It's vertical.
Straight only, Pastor Tim.
Okay, but it doesn't go through the line because this is where that does, right? And then you have the below, right? It's
Yeah. The article. Then you have a slanted line, Pastor Tim, going down.
yeah, the way we did it was like this. And then you had another one like this. Right?
Sometimes they have a slanted line, Pastor Tim, and then they put the article there.
Yeah, I know some versions they do the diagram like this. Like that.
Yeah, like that.
But basically what it does, and then if you had of eager students, you'd have another line coming down. So like say class, you'd have of, right? And then you'd have students is the it's
Of
good.
students.
Yep. So you'd have the object of the preposition here. You'd have this line come out here. You'd have students here. Then you'd have eager down here, right? Something like that.
Yes, that's correct, Pastor Tim.
And so this is really helpful when you're trying to figure out parts of speech. It's not so helpful when you're trying to understand how the passage is structured. All right. The diagram here is more helpful because right away you can see of eager students modifies class. In the evening modifies taught. All right. We're using grammar in both cases to guide and direct the process, but the sentence diagram to me is just not as helpful in showing you how a passage is outlined. It really shows you like the parts of speech. And that's my opinion. There's other guys who line diagram passages and that's helpful to them. I've just found block diagram or structural diagram are more effective in helping visually see how parts of the paragraph or sentence are connected to each other. And because when you get a long sentence, boy, sentence diagram, the line diagram really gets complicated. But a block diagram is not so complicated, and it, I think, tells us more clearly how things are connected. So for example, if we were to add more to this sentence here, Sid taught the class of eager students in the library after lunch, which was very good. All right, if you were to line diagram this, it would take you a while, and you just have this skeleton of all these words everywhere. That whereas if you block diagram it, you can see right away, of eager students, what kind of class. In the library, that's where he taught the class. After lunch, that's when he taught the class. Which was very good, it's describing lunch. What kind of lunch? Okay.
Line diagramming, Pastor Tim, is only good for simple sentences.
I think so. Again, there are those. I had one professor in seminary, he loved line diagramming, and that's what helped him understand passages better. But that's just sort of the way he saw things. But most passages in Scripture are long sentences. And so it'd be really, to me, complicated trying to line diagram. And then you're spending the whole time going through parts of speech, not necessarily looking at like phrases and clauses, because you don't have, notice here, student, or let's look at library, in the library. Now, library by itself is not the full picture. It's in the library. That's where Sid taught the class. And so by looking at a block diagram, you're able to, I think, make the interpretive connections more easily. And so here, like for example, which was very good, that's not a main idea. That's just modifying lunch. And lunch is not the critical point in this sentence. Sid taught the class. That's the main focus, right? And then there are two key parts, or we would have for this, if we were to outline this sentence, we would have two key subpoints here. Okay, let me do this. Sid taught the class. That would be your main point. And two subpoints are where he taught it and when he taught it. Now, eager students simply describes the class, and which was very good simply describes the lunch. But where focus is the action. Sid taught, and I'll have 2 points today, brothers. First, let's talk about where Sid taught. And then secondly, let's talk about when. Okay, that's exactly how you will approach a passage of Scripture. You identify the main idea of the paragraph, and then you'll see all of these other phrases and clauses, and those are somehow modifying other words in the sentence. And as you figure out which words they modify, then you're determining what priority they are within the sentence. So for example, because in the library and after lunch are modifying the action here, they're important. Okay, which was very good is not as important as when Sid taught. It's a point, and it's something you would explain, but it's not the major point. Oh, brothers and sisters, lunch was very good. How good was it? It was very good. So make sure that you have a good lunch. That's not the focus of this sentence. And we often see that happen when guys teach passages. They'll find a phrase or clause and they make that the big deal and the focus when it's really modifying something else that's more important. Okay? So the diagram is meant to help us sort out what the author is giving attention to. Okay? Every word and every phrase in scripture is important. All right, but we want to make sure that we're reflecting what the original author focused on as more important and less important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Pastor Tim,
And
in another sense, what you're saying to us is the main sentences are the main flow of thought by the author.
Yeah, each paragraph, remember where we started here this morning? We at this little diagram here, right? The epistle's made up of paragraphs. Those paragraphs are units of thought. That unit of thought is primarily expressed in the main sentence. And then the rest of the paragraph is in support of that in some way, or connected to it in some way. Connected to the main clause or main sentence of the paragraph. All right, let me just show you from okay, can you see my Bible software? You guys see that? Ephesians 2, for example. Okay. You guys all see that? Okay. You were dead in your trespasses and sins. Okay. That's a main sentence, a main thought. You, subject, were, verb, dead. Predicate adjective. You were dead. And then, in your trespasses and sins, how you were dead. Now, in which you formerly walked, according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit. These are all modifying phrases and clauses. Okay? In which you formerly walked, that modifies trespasses and sins. According to the course of this world, that modifies walked. According to the prince of the power of the air, modifies walked. Of the spirit, modifies air. So these are all sentences flowing from. So this is how, let me just do this. Come on. Give me a second, guys. I'll show this to you real quick. All right, so if I go to okay, this is the passage, and you were dead. All right, that's my main sentence. How are you dead? In your trespasses and sins. Okay, let's do this. All right, and then in which you formerly walked. So let's do. Hopefully you guys can still see that. Okay. In which you formerly walked. So that's going to go with
Trespasses.
yes. Well, it's going to go with trespasses, because it's describing trespasses. All right, here. There we go. Okay, so yeah, this goes here, okay, because it's describing trespasses and sins in which you formerly walked. According to is modifying walked. It's describing how you formerly walked. According to the course, which course? Of this world. According to, that's another way that you walked. According to the prince, which prince? Of the power, which power? Of the air. And I would say
the
the spirit is referring to the prince. Which spirit? That is now working. Do you see how this is going? All these things here are modifiers of something else. They're not part of the main sentence directly. In your trespasses and sins modifies that, but then this guy modifies trespasses and sins. This guy modifies walk. This guy modifies walk. So if you were to take and preach a sermon on the prince of the power of the air, oh, brothers and sisters, be careful, the prince of the power of the air. He's all around us. He controls everything. He's the ruler of this world. And if you're not careful, he'll suck you in, right? Now, those are true statements. And certainly it helps to have sermons on warnings about Satan. But is that the focus here from Paul? No, the primary focus is, hey, you were dead. You were spiritually a corpse. In your
You're dead meat. Okay. That's the title, Pastor Tim. You're dead meat.
Dead meat. There you go. Okay. So now these other points he's making is you were dead in your trespasses and sins. That is what characterized the fact that you were dead. And those trespasses and sins, that's how you used to live. That's how you used to walk. You used to walk or live. Okay, and then so he's all of this down here is describing how you were dead. But the main point is you were dead. And that's also only half the point. The other half of the point comes down here in verse 4. That conjunction, but God, okay, all these
The turning
modifiers
point, Pastor Tim.
inside. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I'd have to change the font. But all these,
The conjunction are the conjunction is the turning point.
yeah. So all of these phrases in here modify stuff in here. But the two main ideas, you were dead, but God, and then he's got more modifiers here. What kind of God? A God being rich in mercy because of his great love. With which he loved us, even when dead. So we're not even to the main. Here it is. God
Made us alive.
made us alive. All right. So there's my sentence. My main clause. God made us alive. And
How?
raised us up. And seated us. Okay, so here, now we begin to see the structure of this passage just by understanding the grammar and how diagramming works. You were dead, but God made us alive. There is the main idea Paul is trying to communicate here. That's it. When you preach this text, that's the focus. God made us alive, which totally fits with what he said in chapter 1, right? Chapter 1 was all about God's work in our salvation. God the Father chose, God the Son redeemed, God the Spirit sealed. And he's just continuing that thought in this chapter that God's the one that made us alive. Okay, so all of these other phrases and clauses are important because they're helping to fill out the point Paul's making, but the main idea is you were dead, God made us alive. That should be, if you're preaching this text, that should be the main point, because those are the two main clauses here. You were dead, but God made us alive. And technically raised us up. These are all parallel, and seated us with him. Those three things together. Okay, and then all these other phrases and clauses, those are modifiers. And we need to explain them, but we need to explain them and how they fit in with the main idea. Which is what? You were dead. That's the subject, verb, predicate, adjective. And then but God, that links these two together, coordinates them. Remember, coordinating conjunction. God made us alive. God, the subject, made us alive, raised us up, seated us. Those three actions are the main idea. You were dead, but God made us alive, raised us up, seated us with him. So this is why the diagramming is so powerful and why we spend a lot of time on this, because it really shows us the focus of the passage. Because the author's he's using grammar. All right? He's using grammar, and there are
Pastor
certain...
Tim,
Yeah.
Pastor Tim, may I have some observations here?
Yeah, sure.
In verse 1, you were dead, but in verse 4, God made us. The verse 1, you, and the verse 4, us. Is there a contradictory of pronoun here?
No, because Paul is just... I mean, that's something you're going to draw out as you're preaching this passage.
You is also plural.
Yeah, it's you plural, so he's speaking
Plural
to his
pronoun.
hearers.
Yeah.
And here in the second part, God made us alive. He's now including himself in what God has done. He could have said we were dead, but he chose to say you. So he's not contradicting. He's just for whatever reason, and this is what you would want to study and try to understand, is Paul first directs his attention to his hearers, to the Ephesians, and then in the second main clause, he includes himself.
Okay.
Second person, singular and plural, the same form, man, you.
Yeah, you here in this case is plural.
And by context, he's referring to the Ephesian believers, Pastor Tim, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he goes from his focus in verses 1 to 3 on them, and then verse 4 and following, he includes everybody, and himself included. Now, why he does that, that's a good question to think about. Why didn't he just say, but God made you alive? Or why didn't he say, and we were dead in our trespasses and sins? That would be an exegetical, or an interpretive issue that you need to think about. John does that too a lot. He'll go from second person plural to first person plural.
It seems, Pastor Tim, there's a change of perspective.
Perhaps, yeah. Yeah, because you is more directed, more
Yeah.
not confrontational, but what's the word?
Convicting.
Maybe
More direct.
More convicting.
More direct to...
Yeah, and notice too, if you look in verse 3, among them we too. You see that we there? all formerly lived in the lust of our flesh. Okay, so he in verse 3 he pulls himself in to the what he's talking about here, but he begins with you. Okay, and then I think in verse 11, verse 11, he goes back and says again, therefore remember that formerly you, the Gentiles. So he again directs attention, but then here, let me just show you. Okay, so you've got, you were dead in your trespasses, you formerly walked. We, verse 3, our, verse 3, us, we, verse 5, us, verse 6, us, verse 7, right? But then notice verse 11. Therefore, remember that formerly you, Gentiles, you were at that time separate. And then he says, but in Christ, you who were formerly far off have been brought near. For he himself is, now note he does it again, our peace. First person. And then he does third person. And then back in verse 18, our access. And then verse 19, so then you are no longer. So he's going back and forth. So you got to try to follow what he's doing.
Maybe Pastor Tim, because he's about to talk about the distinctions between Jews and Gentiles.
Yeah, he
Maybe
does
that's
that.
part of the.
Yeah, here in verses 11. So clearly the you is specifically the Ephesians because you're Gentiles.
And Paul was a Jew also in background.
Yeah. So that's an interpretive issue that you have to sort of walk through. Sometimes he's specifically referring to the Ephesians as opposed to other people. Sometimes he's referring to them as Gentiles as opposed to Jews. Other times here he's referring to them, you, in the sense of more generically, people, you people in general, as so. That's what you have to kind of sort through there. That's a good observation, though. But again, it's not a contradiction. It's a distinction he's making, and you have to ask yourself, why does he do that? And maybe there are certain points he wants to make even more direct towards them, so that, like somebody said, the conviction maybe, or the realization is stronger when he uses the second person plural. And John the Apostle does that effectively in 1 John. He uses we and a lot, but he also at times will say you when he wants to be more direct. So,
Okay.
Pastor Tim, Paul was making contrast of the universality of the former condition in contrast with the specificity of the newness of what God has brought about in Christ. No, that seems to be the flow of the thought, the trend of his flow of thought.
Yeah.
Leading up to verse 11.
Yeah, there's exactly a universality. Verses 1 to 10 is focused on God's role in our salvation, that it is an act of him. And then verse 11, he wants to direct attention to the Ephesians, and in their Gentileness, being Gentiles, they were even further away from salvation than the Jews were, right? Because he says, You were separate from Christ, meaning from Messiah. You had no messianic promise, Gentiles. That was given to the Jews. You were excluded from Israel. You were strangers to the covenant. The covenants were not given to Gentiles. They were given to Israel. Every covenant, right?
Mhm.
The Abrahamic, the Davidic, even the new covenant was given to Israel. You go back and look at the covenants. It was directed to the Jews. Now, of course, in God's program, he, brought in the Gentiles into receiving the new covenant. But the Gentiles were not the ones that God gave the covenant to originally. Go back to Jeremiah 31. It very clearly says he's speaking to Israel and Judah. So he's reminding the Ephesians of this, right? He said, look, Ephesians, you were even further away from salvation than the Jews. So yeah, from 1 and 10 was more general to all people. Verse 11, he's now focusing attention specifically toward the Ephesians as Gentiles. And then his point is, he draws it back around to say, but God now has brought us all together, Jew and Gentile, have been brought near by the blood of Christ.
And
And all of this, guys, when you diagram this passage, this is going to pop out. Remember, you were separate. That's the main sentence in verse 11. But, coordinating conjunction, you have been brought near. So those would be the two main ideas. You were separate, but now you've been brought near. Everything else in verses 11 through 19 are going to modify something in those two main ideas.
okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you guys have succeeded in extending our time to the point I can't review assignment 3. So you must have
We will,
together.
we will make do with the examples, Pastor Tim.
So I can still probably, cover that next week with you guys as a review. But
Yeah.
that means that you're all going to work really hard this week to get caught up, right?
Assignment 1, very tough, Pastor Tim.
Assignment 1.
We have to really look at all 21 chapters and
Well, just that's why I put in the example from Luke, just more of an outline, because it's a big book.
Yeah.
I understand, you can sort of just outline it primarily since it's a large book. So don't spend hours and hours on that unless you want to.
The temptation also, Pastor Tim, when our curiosity, well, I speak for myself, when my curiosity kicks in, then I branch off into something and try to pursue a path. Sometimes it takes a while before I get back to the main point of what I'm really trying to get at.
Yeah, and that's okay. I mean, that's the joy of discovery, that happens. But as far as the assignment's concerned, I mean, if you want to just sort of really give an outline and show how your passage fits, where it fits in that outline, that's okay. Just for your Old Testament passage, I wanted you, because it was shorter, to go through and really summarize each of the stories, each of the chapters. But for John, you can, for the literary context, you can just sort of give an outline. It's fine. Just follow the format that I give you. But I'll and then for character and setting analysis, we covered that last week, so that shouldn't take you a very long time to do. Scene analysis will take you longer, so we'll spend a little time on that next week. So,
but you said, Pastor Tim, when we go to scene analysis, we will have to do the whole book also.
No, just
right.
Your passage.
Just our particular passage.
Yeah. Yeah, for character and setting, for scene, for plot analysis, that's just your passage.
Don't make it more difficult, Pastor Bobby.
Huh?
Don't make it more difficult. It's already difficult.
That's correct. But
Go through.
for example, in my experience with Ruth, I was just focusing on chapter 4. But the problem is you cannot fully understand chapter 4 if you do not look at the whole story, if you do not look at the whole book. So the tendency really is to go out and really look at everything. So you could not help but go into that. But it's very helpful. Please do not misunderstand me. For me,
I understand it.
the
It's really
background,
frustrating when you're
literally context,
led to that
is
direction.
very good. No, it helps you have a grasp of the whole book in relation to the whole Bible and to the other books.
Yeah, and really the point is you have to understand how your passage connects to two things, right? That we talked about. One,
Yeah.
how does your passage connect to what came before and what comes after?
Yeah,
So if you have the wedding at Cana.
that's my passage.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so let's say your passage is wedding at Cana. First, you have to understand, okay, two things. One, how does this passage fit to the purpose of the book? How is it connected to John's purpose for the gospel? And he's
I discovered already, Pastor Tim, because
okay.
The thematic approach of John, he divides his gospel into two divisions. At least that's how I'm looking at it now. I could be short, but at least from this point, I saw that John presented the great signs of Jesus, all the supernatural and dynamic. That's why he did not begin with the genealogy. No, he started right off with the deity of Christ, his origin from eternity. And then he went on continually doing that, no, until the turning point of the second part, which is the glorification, which leads now to the crucifixion. So I divided it into that theme: the great signs and the glorification. And then the second division is the sort of the epilogue after the resurrection.
He tells us explicitly his purpose, right? In John 20.
Yeah.
That's
John
a framing.
20.
That's a purpose statement. So every story in John is going to be connected to that somehow. And then, I think John frames the whole book around 7 signs, because he says in his purpose, these signs, which Jesus showed, and the purpose is he would describe those signs so that we would see Jesus as the Messiah, man, and the Son of God, divine, so that we will believe. And so John structures his whole book around these 7 signs, and with the intent of giving attention to Jesus as both God and man, so that we believe and have eternal life. And so you have to understand first, how does the story I have connect to that? The purpose. And then the second thing you need to know is, how does my story connect to what came before and what comes after? The flow of thought. So this wedding at Cana, one, how does it connect to the purpose of the book? You got to be able to answer that question. And then 2, how does it connect to John 1? And how does it connect to John 2, verse 12 and following? What's the line, the flow of thought? Okay, so those are the 2 questions you guys need to answer for your specific passage. And that's why we do a background context and literary context, to try to give you the big picture so that you can answer those 2 questions. All right, you can't take your story and pull it out and teach it in isolation from John's flow of thought. Okay, now there may be certain elements within your story that that we don't find in other stories in John, because, you know, like for example, in John 2, I think that after the wedding at Cana is the cleansing of the temple, right? So,
Yeah.
so in that
Immediately
case,
after.
you know, John's showing us another attribute of Christ, you know, his zeal for the glory of God. You know, that's important for us to see. But you know, we need to figure out, or you need to understand, how does my story fit in the purpose of the book? How does my story connect to what's before and after? Okay, and then you go into the story, characters, settings, the scenes, and those kind of things. All right, so we'll talk about the scenes next week and just review the scene analysis just to refresh you a little bit on that. All right, so I'll give you an extra week for that assignment. Okay, so make sure get caught up in your John passages. John passages as well. Okay.
So I got caught up, Pastor Tim. You see, all my books are now on the floor, not on the shelf anymore.
Okay, any
No more
any
books on the
other-
shelves.
what's that,
No more
Sid?
books on the shelves.
Yeah, look at Sid's got all of Pastor Bobby's
Pastor
books.
Bobby's books, no more.
Kaya pala
Because he's not reading, man.
napansin
He's
ko
not reading his
bakante.
books.
All right, anybody else have any questions or comments?
I got carried away, Pastor Tim, because I began to realize how it connects to First John.
Yeah.
How it connects to First John. So that's what's the relationship to First.
Yeah, those two books really are kind of, I think, kind of go together, right? You have the gospel, which is intended to, you know, so that we would believe, and then you have First John, which is written to believers so that we would have assurance of that faith.
Yeah.
So they go
In the context of Gnosticism, Cerinthus, and Docetism.
Yeah, it's the same background context. The Gospel of John was written in with the same issues. So John's addressing those issues in the Gospel of John in regards to as an evangelistic approach, and he addresses those issues in the letter, the first epistle of John, to believers in how do they, with all these false teaching going on, how do I know that I have eternal life? Because what was happening is, you know, with all these false teaching about the person of Christ and these things, it was causing problems with people's assurance. And what that did is, if you weren't sure if you were saved, it would affect, you wouldn't approach God, right? Because notice he said, I write these things to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, so that you may know that you have eternal life. But then he doesn't stop there, because he says after that in 1 John 5, 12? So write these things. And how does he put
Chapter
it?
14, verse
Yeah,
14.
14.
Verse 14.
He says, if we know that he hears it. Okay, so it's not all coming to me immediately, so I'm just going to look it up. And this is the assurance, that's right. We have an approaching God, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we will have what we ask of him. So 1 John was not just written as an assurance of salvation. It was written so that we would draw near to God in prayer with confidence. And if you're not sure if you're saved, you won't draw near to God in confidence, right? So 1 John wasn't just written as a letter to assure salvation. It was really written in order to assure salvation so that we would approach God with confidence as his children. Okay, so But anyway, yeah, First John and John really go hand in hand as far as two books connected with the same background context, same issues that are surrounding them, but one addressed to believers to give assurance so that they'd have confidence in approaching God. The other addressed primarily for unbelievers to come to know the true Christ and have eternal life. And then 2nd and 3rd John are actually personal letters directed to individuals regarding specific issues that were facing them. So, okay. You guys are probably hungry. Any last questions or comments before I ask Anselmo to close us in prayer? Any final comments? Okay, well, covered a lot of things. I hope that was helpful. Recorded it, so you can always go back and listen again if there's something that wasn't clear to you. And then next week we'll cover assignment 3, Lord willing. And I think that's it. So,
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
Anselmo, you want to close us in prayer? And let's pray for our birthday boy, brother Alex, too. Just make sure to unmute yourself, Anselmo, before you.
Okay, let us pray.